welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today I'm going to teach you how to make my Wildflower Meadow quilt pattern. This is a really pretty pattern. There's a lot of triangles, but I'm going to show you how to make them all from squares. So it's a little easier, and it definitely makes for much more accurate piecing because you're not having to worry about distorting that bias when you sew on it. Let's get started. So the first thing I need to do is draw a line on the wrong side of all of my 2.5 inch squares. You're going to have a bunch of purple and a bunch of green squares if you're making it in the colorway. This is a great scrappy quilt. You could also make it with like a fat quarter bundle if you wanted to keep it all in the same color family. But feel free to make it your own. But for this example, I'm going to stick with the colorway that the pattern is in. And so I need a purple and a green for each one. So now I'm coming back to the sewing machine, and normally we sew with a 1/4 inch stitch, but for this one, since we've drawn the line, we're going to sew directly on that line. So I'm actually leaving my needle in the middle position of my sewing machine. So what I've done is I've arranged my square so that way the edge of the little square is in line with the edge of my bigger square. For full instructions on how to do this, you can purchase the pattern at quiltaddictsanonymous.com. It comes with diagrams on how to put each one of these together, as well as your fabric instructions and requirements and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm lining this up so that the needle is going to be right on top of that line that I drew. And now I'm just going to sew along that line. And now that I'm done, I'm going to take my purple one and I'm going to put that also in the corner, line that up nicely, and now I'm going to sew right on my second line. Now if you like, before you cut, you can go ahead and press that open and make sure that your point is still coming all the way out to the point of your square to make sure everything will be nice and accurate when you're done. I've done a lot of these, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it. I'm pretty confident that I've got it right here. So what I'm doing here is I'm just trimming this to a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm putting the 1/4 inch mark right on that line that I drew and then sewed over. And then I'm cutting my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Not totally critical that you are right on for that 1/4 inch seam allowance, but you don't want to be too skinny because then that seam can pop open if you choose to have this long armed. Now it's time to press this open. If you want, you can go ahead and set those seams first with your iron, and then you just want to press it open. This is a bias seam, so you do want to be careful with it. Make sure it doesn't get too wacky on you, like you wouldn't want to go all over like you were ironing a dress shirt. But at this point, all the accuracy is there. You've tested, you know it's good, and so you pretty much can just press that open from this point. So that's it. This is our first unit that we are making for this quilt. Alright, now it's time to move on to those flying geese. I promise I'm going to make it really easy. We're actually going to make it all from squares, and there's no waste. So this is a really great way to do flying geese. I find it very accurate, and you're not wasting any of that beautiful fabric. Let's get started. So for every single flying geese unit we're going to make here, we need 2 purples and 2 greens. And I want to flip those over because, just like the other one, we're going to start by drawing a line on the wrong side of those fabric squares. And you're going to want to do this for all of them. For this demonstration, I'm just going to do the 4 we need to make the block. The way this works is it looks a little goofy while you're doing it. It looks like it's not really going to work out, but it does. But you get 4 flying geese for every 4 little squares and 1 big square. It's a really great way of making flying geese units. You probably won't want to do it any other way once you get this down. Alright, so I've got those lined up, and now I'm going to go ahead and lay both of my purples on. If you want, you can pin these in place, or you can just put them in place as you go through. For the sake of this demonstration, I know we have a lot of people who might be doing this for the first time. I've gone ahead and I've lined up my corners of my squares up top. We can go ahead and just stick a pin in there. And they're also lined up here on the bottom. So we're going to stick a little pin in here. And you want to make sure that you are doing one color to start with, because then that will make sure that you have one of each color when it's done. So I know if you haven't done this before, this probably doesn't make sense, but just trust me, it works. Now I've got to set my sewing machine to a scant 1/4 inch stitch, and by doing that I'm able to really get that math right on. You know, that you might have a little bit thicker thread or fabric, and so this just gives you a little bit of wiggle room, so you've got a little bit to trim off if you're not so perfect with your seams. If you don't have the ability to do a scant 1/4 inch on your sewing machine, instead of putting your presser foot right next to that line, put it right on top of that line, and that will give you the same effect. So I've got my presser foot lined up with a side here, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew along. As I come to that pin, I'm going to take that out because I don't need it anymore. I'm kind of making sure that my lines are lined up as I come closer to where my seams come across. And then as get to the next pin, take that out, and then go ahead and keep sewing until you get to the back. Now, if you were doing a whole bunch of these, you could chain piece these, but for this one demonstration, I'm just going to do the one. So now I'm going to flip it around and do the other side. So now it's time to come back over to this cutting mat, and I'm going to want to cut right on that center line. And again, it's not totally necessary that you're right on that line. If you're a little to the side, it's okay. But don't get too skinny with your seams because you don't want those to pop open on you. Alright, so here's where it starts to look a little weird. I'm going to go ahead and set that seam, and I'm going to press these open so that the little triangles are pointing away from the big triangle. And if you've done this right, this is going to look like a heart at this point. And I once had someone tell me that these look like Tibetan prayer flags and that it didn't look at all like it was going to be a flying geese, but it does, it works out. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my green square and I'm going to lay that right in the center. So I've got my points lined up of my big square and my little square, and then this square here, this point is right in between my two purples. So that's exactly what I want it to look like. I'm going to put a pin in here for the demonstration. You don't have to pin if you don't want to, but you're certainly welcome to. So now I'm going to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam down either side of this drawn line on my green square. Make sure you take those pins out. Now if I've done this right, as I come out, there's this little valley between where the green and the purple meet up. And that seam line should be coming straight out there if you've got everything lined up correctly. So that's something to look out for. So this is that little valley I was talking about. If you watch, the seam comes straight to where these two squares meet, and it should be coming right out there if you've done everything correctly, and it is here, so that's great. So now it's time to reveal our flying geese unit. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart from the drawn line, and now it actually looks like a flying geese unit. So I'm going to take these that we just cut apart. I'm going to go ahead and press them open. And then we have one final step before our flying geese are totally done. So now we need to trim this up to 2.5 by 4.5 inches rectangularly. So ideally, our points are going to end up right at the 2.5 and 0 and the 2.5 and 4.5 here. If they don't, you're going to want to kind of manipulate the ruler so that they end up where they should be. In this case, I'm just a hair shy, like maybe a 1/16 of an inch shy of hitting the edge of the ruler here, but my points are at 4.5 and then hanging a little bit over, so that's going to be all right. We're going to have a good squared up block there. So I'm not cutting a ton off, but it's going to be enough to where it really makes a difference in the end when you put these together. So now what I'm doing is I'm lining it up with my cut edge now that I just cut is right on the 4.5 inch mark here, and then the 2.5 down here. My 45-degree line is now on this flying geese, the little one. And so I can tell that everything is where it should be. Again, I'm still off just maybe a 1/16 of an inch right here. That's going to be okay. Anything less than 1/8 of an inch and you're going to be all right, and you can fudge that in the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that. And again, you're not really taking a whole lot off, but it really does make a big difference when you go to put these together. Now I have one that's already ready to go here, so I can show you this next step. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to turn this, or it doesn't matter. So I'm going to flip these right sides together, and I want it so that my seam line is up, because as I'm sewing along here, I'm going to sew along so that my needle is just to the right of where these seams come together, and that way you'll be able to see that point. It'll be exactly where it should be. You could pin this, you don't have to. I'm not going to for this case. Alright, so we're done sewing our scant 1/4 inch seam, so now you can go back to your regular 1/4 inch seam. And I've got everything lined up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and start sewing. My feed dogs are not happy with that point there. Alright, so I'm kind of slowing down as I come to this point because I really want to get right to the right side of where those seam allowances come together, just like we talked about in the last shot. And if I have to come in or go out a little bit from that standard 1/4 inch seam, do it, because it'll be better to have your point perfect than to be off just a hair in your quilting. It really won't matter in terms of being square. Alright, so I'm really happy with this point. Let me bring it over to the cutting board so you guys can see how that looks. Yeah, so I stitched, you can see, just right one needle width to the right of where these came together. And so then when you open this up, that point is just perfect. So that's how you get perfect points when you sew flying geese. So we're going to make a bunch of these, and then you're ready to put your block together. So the pattern comes with a layout diagram, but I'm going to show you how to really get some perfect points when you're sewing these together from unit to unit. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to flip them right sides together. Let me zoom in a little bit here. If you can see, these two triangles are both on the same trajectory. So I want to make those line up, and this is really a feel thing. You kind of just want to feel around here until you can feel that they're really right on top of each other. So once you're pretty satisfied with where they are at, then go ahead and take a pin and just stick it in that seam allowance. And then when you sew, that'll keep those in line where they should be, and you're going to have a pretty good point when you come out. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew this one together so you can see what I mean by that. Get my pin pulled out of there, and now I'm lining up my bottom corners. Now we have our moment of truth. We have to see how these are coming together, and that's pretty good. I mean, if I wanted to, I could pick the seam a little and make it a little better, but I'm pretty happy with this. I would leave it. If you got it too, I bet you'd probably be pretty happy with this as well. So it takes a little extra time as you're pinning everything together. You want to make sure that you're pinning all of those triangles where they come together, but it really makes for a beautiful block when you're all done. So using that tip, you're going to piece your units into rows and your rows into a block until you have this, our lovely little Wildflower Meadow block. It's a lot of triangles, but it really isn't that hard when you break it down. And when you do the border, you're going to do it the same way, where you just piece a whole bunch of those flying geese together, and make sure you are just to the side of where those points come together, and you'll have perfect points along each one. Now if you're doing this scrappy, what I did was I grabbed a bunch of fat quarters of purple and green. You need a yard cumulative of your purple and your green for the center, and then for that border and binding you're going to want 1 continuous yard of fabric. But for the center, you can go ahead and just grab a yard of each, mix and match it, and you'll be good to go. Thank you for following along. I hope you enjoyed this pattern. You can get it as a downloadable PDF on quiltaddictsanonymous.com, and happy quilting!